With the mention of the poet Rilke during that reading, I pulled some of the Rilke that we carried and put it on the table over there. All right, up next we have David Cavanagh. David Cavanagh writes poems about sleepwalkers, climate change, biking, borders, memory, gun violence, astronauts, Easter eggs, the beautiful, terrifying, amusing struggle for an authentic life. His books include Straddle, Falling Body, and The Middleman from Salmon Poetry, and Cycling in Plato's Cave from Fomite Press. He lives in Burlington, Vermont. Please welcome David Cavanagh.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Fernando. Appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for being here on Sunday afternoon. Lovely. I'm going to read a selection from all of those books, a couple. I'll read actually all of those books. so I'll read a couple of poems from each one. So it's a little bit of a medley of old and new. I'll start with two poems from my first book, The Middleman. I have not read this poem in a long time. I read it again the other night and thought, well, maybe. You decide. It's called Call It. Call it some fashionable moniker, if you like. Call it a midlife thing, a passage, a phase, a burr in the saddle. Call it something dismissive, mildly self-mocking, a zit of the soul, a speed bump on life's interstate. Or get classical, call it a Dante thing, a ring of hell, a mezzo del Carmen thing. Call it whatever you damn well want. Tell yourself you'll get over it. Call it something halfway attractive, your long-awaited break for freedom, breakout, breakaway, or better yet, tinge it with irony, very Gucci. Call it breakdown, break up, way, way up. Or if you can get past the LL-Bean-ness of it all, the Oprah and Regis of it, or if you can get past the self-help book, I'm a shithead, you're a shithead. Call it not wanting ever to die. Call it jealous, those deep-damned gods, those immortal deadbeat dads, those eternal diaphanous moms. Call it wanting to taste the true deep drop before you give over. Call it looking around, looking behind, looking ahead, seeing only dregs, the tip, the bit, the main street stim and tease, the artificial bottled extract of what you had planned, what you had hoped, what you thought you would surely do. Call it bewildered, befuddled, beleaguered. Call it wanting more than ever seems available. Call it a house half built, a blueprint lost in a drawer you dread opening, that pile of forgotten plans. Call it utterly pissed off. At youth, for example. No, not youth. Youthfulness. The lithe, sexy swagger of it. Call it sickly green. Call it stiff in the morning, but in all the wrong places. Call it getting up. Call it numb. Call it crazy, blind, and pain of numbness. Call it putting on the shirt, the tie, the socks, the shoes, top to bottom, out the door, all armored up. Call it the quiet roar and more. Call it what it is for once. Just call it what it is. And come on, get over it. Call it your life. I'm tired now. One more poem from that book. This is a poem that it's called It's So Much Like Missiles. It's actually, this is from my first book, but more and more these days I'm drawn to try to write poems that have a political edge to them. Can't imagine why. But it's I don't know what Steve and Sharon would say about this, but I find it murderously difficult to write poems with a political edge. It's so easy to slip into preachiness and boring dogma. What I've found is the best way for me is to try to link it up with something personal. And whether that works or not, I don't know, but it's my way. So this is called It's So Much Like Missiles. I wrote it many moons ago, and in a way I'm sort of sad that it still has a certain relevance for me at any rate. There's a mention of Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau in it, except it's not Justin Trudeau. It's his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, from around 1980. It's so much like missiles. One day you hear they've been fired, the missiles I mean. You imagine them curving like so many golden gates between 100 cities, serene vapor trails with some message you cannot imagine and don't have to, for you know you have 1/2 of 1 hour. And everything's suddenly simple, like the time you heard your father had died, long distance, the phone clicking softly as a heart, while you felt everything freeze in your tiny kitchen, altered and possibly unchanged. And the funny thing is not that they've gone up, the missiles, I mean, but that they remind you of something you didn't do, some words you didn't say, just didn't take the trouble to say, like the time you were leaving town and a friend, and you never told her how much she meant to you, and you never saw her again. Now missiles are flying, and it's just like when your father died, and the visit you'd put off became a dream train you lived on nightly, dark train pounding on smoothest rails of guilt, never, ever arriving. The thing about what's unsaid is you can never take it back. If you had made that final visit, you'd have fought with him most probably over Trudeau or disarmament, something not too close. And it would have been furious and futile till it hit you that this time he was dying, and you'd have stopped, and so would he, both of you sheepish, feeling each other sheepish, awkwardness, your last strange sharing. But the thing about not visiting, not loving enough to say or fight or apologize or see something new between you, the thing about not saying is, it's so much like those missiles, up there, on the way, on the final way, so undone, so unsaid, and so impossible to take back. Well, that's the happy portion of the reading. I'll move to the most recent book now, and a poem called The Iceman, which is about a frozen person who was discovered in the Austrian-Italian Alps in the 1990s, I think it was, named Otzi, was given that name, Otzi. There's a little preamble to the poem. I'm not finding it. Where'd it go? There it is. There's a little preamble. In 1991, he was found inside a glacier of the Alps. Seems he had been out walking. An X-ray found an arrowhead in his back. He was 5,300 years old. The Iceman. If he had known his stroll by an alpine lake would be his last, how the arrow from behind would thud into his daydream, how the lake would claim him, harden, how anthropologists would pore over his Neolithic self the way his own kin hovered with stone knives over a kill, ready to skin, dismember, eat. If he were fast-tracked 5 millennia, would he say, "What are you looking at? What do you want to know? Where fire comes from? Or, hey, where can I get some of those sneakers?" Or, "I am no source. I am an omen." The way one of us, blindsided, mangled by a muscle car running the light, might face the maker calmly, nothing more to prove, might say, I don't want in, just want you to know what I've been through, in case you want to learn something. You gods, such know-it-alls. Most of all, would he have wanted a word with his mate, left that morning by a hearth? What tenderness, what worry might have furrowed that big brow? Read a couple of newer ones from the next book, which might be called The Somnambulist. Anybody here sleepwalk? We're used to sleepwalking? There's usually at least one in the crowd this size. Statistically, there is. Even. Well, there is one. Yeah, I was a sleepwalker when I was a child. So this poem's called The Somnambulist, which means sleepwalker. The Somnambulist. Past the coffee table, its treacherous corners, around the hushed ottoman, pause in front of the flickering screen as if I'd stepped right out of it. My family gapes, past lamps and ficus, my swerves precise, my balance impeccable. I'm on a mission yet to be revealed. All I know is how to walk on water, navigate a narrow channel, and how not to run up on the rocks. I have no notion how I know. I glide, I barely touch down. My loved ones are afraid to wake or touch me, maybe for my sake, maybe their own. In the morning, I remember nothing, so I return another night and another. I learn without trying to move like a snake, a high steel worker on vacation, a retired minesweeper. You'd swear I know what I'm doing. You'd swear I'm hearing instructions. I think I may grow old this way, drifting unbruised and unrecollected, autopilot supreme. Morning, I'm back in bed. This one's called Hero's Piss Take. Are you familiar with that phrase, piss take? It's like a parody, making fun of something.
We already know.
Hero's Piss Take. Aging hero, groggy but purposeful, rolls out for bladder calls, shuffles to the john. Every 2 hours, like a sentry on his rounds, imagines he is peeing the ills of the world. Each time it's different. With halting stream goes poverty. In dribbles, bye-bye hunger. Next time it's war or greed. Slow starts and stops for environmental degradation. Try again in 2 hours. Sudden bursts for racism. Nothing, not a drip at religious bigotry. Exhausting, this night work. No end of woe to void. Finally, near morning, like God on the seventh, he rests. The next night it begins again, with evil regenerated and new pressure to purge. A noble need, mythical. He reflects that Sisyphus must have peed on his rock. If only Christian, Hindu, Muslim, unbeliever, Jew could coordinate bladders. If those bent on accretion could agree on letting go. Cooperative elimination for a drawn-out global and better sleep for all. Hauls himself up again. Bone-tired, takes aim at the porcelain purgatory that with wide open gleam seems to mock as it collects his lone persistent penances. Back to the sack. Hero drifts, tosses, snores, dreams of being chased. New waste, the ooze of indifference, rises within. He's yanked awake for another go. I was worried that the only audience for that poem would be men of a certain age. But then a woman who heard it said, no, any woman who's had a baby or a UTI can relate. So I felt better. This is my shortest poem, I think, to date. It's 2 lines long, and there are 6 words in each line. And in fact, they're the same 6 words, but not exactly. The poem's called The Good Life, the guilt of living in comfort, the comfort of living in guilt. It's the enigmatic portion. Right, well, maybe a couple of poems from the bicycle book, especially since Steve was reading some sports poems. I'll try to contribute to that grouping. So these are from a book called Cycling in Plato's Cave. It's a book of bicycle-related poems. This one's called Long Ride in High Wind. If I'm sure there are some cyclists in here. Anybody who does a fair bit of cycling knows that wind and weather are significant factors when you're biking. There we go. Long ride in high wind. You put your head down and push, pull. You think perfect circles with your feet. Same pressure down, up, around, again, again. You drop to the lowest position. Present as little of yourself as you can. You drop to the lowest position. Present as little of yourself as you can keep presenting for the longest while you can. You pedal with crybaby thighs, mile after mile, straight into it, you burn. You say out loud, and it's blown back into you, this is stupid, really stupid. And you pedal straight into the burn. You're not trying to beat it. You can never beat it. You look at the tall, bent-over grass, and you know you can never beat it. You are making your way through. You're admiring the force, invisible, relentless against torso, and the will that powers your lungs, Zen masters that take in, transform, make use, blow back a bit of their own. Same will that made your sweet, aged, dying cat keep trying to get up when his back legs could no longer do it. You wear a look that some would call grimace. You have no time to explain. You are happy. And a short poem that looks a little bit like a half circle here. It's called Power Train. I don't know if you don't do a lot of cycling, you may not know what the power train on a bicycle is. It's essentially this. It's the crank set and the hub and the pedals, the part that powers the bike forward. Actually, I shouldn't have said that because the poem describes what it just said. Power train. Compact, low center of it all, where thrust meets crankset, frame and chain, powers hub, spoke, rim and tire to cover ground. But it so depends on last night's sleep, too much wine at dinner, an argument over money, the kiss that sweetly made it up. It all goes back to the kiss. You know that now, so far and sweaty down the road. The kiss connects. The kiss drives all. Not that the steel down low is nothing, but it is nothing without the kiss. And I'll read just 2 more. One is they're both pretty short. So So there's so many dire things going on in our world right now, but one of the hopeful things for me is the way many men are now sharing in the difficult and crucial work of child rearing. I hope the women in the room agree with that. So, anyway, this poem is based on observing my two nephews who are each have two children, and they and their wives do a marvelous job of sharing that work. The beautiful men, my nephews, holding their beautiful babies, a whole new cartography of caring. These men, more pioneers than any westward horseman. The fields and far mountains of gentleness they fumbled for, found, the tease, the tickle. So one child giggles and one, still serious, leans sideways against her dad. The ridgeline widens, details fill our view as we draw near. And I'll end this poem. Thanks very much, folks. Really appreciate this. It's a pleasure. Pleasure for me, anyway. This poem's called Quantum Jump. It's my tentative foray into a poem that has something to do with physics. So one of the debates in physics for a long time was, does light travel in a straight line, or does it travel in waves? Right? And it turns out, at least as far as people understand, scientists understand so far, the answer is both. And how can that be? It's a paradox. And that paradox is kind of at the core of what came to be known as quantum mechanics or quantum physics. That and things that grew out of that having to do with sense that everything is uncertain. And all we can really say about life is that there are tendencies for things to happen. Anyway, this is called Quantum Jump. The wave that crashes on the rocks is made of particles that behave so much like waves, the scientists scratch their individual heads until they're one bobbing mass and their voices rise like spray. Certain, uncertain, certainly we are all going to die one day, probably, is about all with precision we can say. No one has ever not done it, and I don't aim to be the first. Not that I lack ambition, only that aiming doesn't seem to help. Still, smack the tennis ball against the wall often enough, it could one time go straight through. So I say unto you, phone the woman, plant the rare hibiscus. Most likely it won't take, except when it does. Thanks very much.